All right, a quick shout out to start to my friends Eric Husayn and Joe over at Steel Forged in Fire Sword Enthusiast. Check out their channels. Recently, both of these gentlemen featured the newish Kabar modified Tanto. They did such a good job, I want one. I haven't pulled the trigger on the purchase yet, I probably will soon. But until then, I wanted to do a quick pair of videos to give you guys a look at another line of Kabar products that I'm quite fond of, and that would be the Ethan Becker Series. Why 2 videos? Well, I wanted to devote part 1 to taking a look at the knife that made Kabar's reputation, the USMC combat knife, and then how these compare. Now, I've had a whole lot more time with the original Kabar, so that's where we're going to start. Another flashback. You know, what would this channel be without some storytelling? Going back again to the 70s, as I was studying Japanese martial arts swordsmanship, I was looking for a knife suitable for Tanto Jutsu. And there weren't a lot of Tanto in the store, if any. This was before Cold Steel got in the game. So I selected the camelless version of this. Why? Because, well, it was half the price, and I was cheap. You know, we're talking $20 versus $40. And, of course, I didn't know how I was going to like it. And the answer is it served its purpose. Now, the camelless is overbuilt as compared to the Kabar, and not necessarily in good ways. Blade's beefier, grip is beefier, which changes the balance and how it feels in the hand, and not for the better. Edge grind, nowhere near as good. So it didn't hold that good an edge. It was hard to keep sharp. And fit and finish, as we'll talk about, wasn't nearly as good. However, it did serve the purpose that I needed it to, and served a lot of other purposes. So I used the heck out of that knife for about 3 or 4 years. Was it my primary training knife? No. That would be one of these. Yeah, I'm one of those guys. And we'll talk about that later. But frankly, this is a dedicated use fighting knife. And yeah, they put serrations on it to try to call it a survival knife. And I've tried to put it to those uses, really, and we'll talk about that later. But this design is indeed very useful for pretty much anything you need a knife this size for. So I took it camping, which means exposure to elements, and uses everything from cutting, carving, wood chopping, batoning, prying, food prep, right? You've also got a lot of use for any other utility purposes. So this became my all-around utility knife, my rough, tough, heavy use household shop toolbox knife. What happened to the camelless? Well, after about 3-4 years, 1981. Yes, I remember the year. Shall we say a friend, shall we say borrowed it, for shall we say a social gathering. And then I found the knife the next morning in the debris. Apparently he had used it, among other things, to cut up a watermelon, and then left the carbon steel blade buried to the hilt in half the watermelon, which ruined a perfectly good knife and a perfectly good watermelon. What's the moral to the story? Don't do drugs, kids. Or at least don't borrow someone else's knife and do drugs, kids. So, shall we say I convinced him to buy it from me. You know, you break it, you bought it. And then took his $20, went back to the knife shop, and figured I'd throw in my $20 and go ahead and buy the actual Kabar to make myself feel better. And it did, because after spending 3-4 years with that camelless and using the heck out of it, and then having this in my hand, oh my, yeah, no comparison. It's not as beefy, but it feels so much better overall. Balance, grip feels so much better, and just the overall build quality. Now, after about 3 or 4 years of reasonably hard use, that camelless was showing it. Guard and pommel were starting to come loose, and the blade was kind of beat up. Now, 1981, I've had this knife for 40 years, and put it through the same use, not for 4 years, but for 40 years. And yeah, nothing on this knife is loose. Now, there are people who are concerned with the build, the design, the tang specifically of this knife. It's not quite a full tang, not quite a rat tail. It's kind of half and half. If you look at the pommel, you will see the end of the rectangular tang. And they have a drawing of the build of the knife that comes on the box. So it's a rectangular tang. It's about half size, all the way down. They then stack the leather washers and shape them and press them down, and then they put this pretty solid metal pommel on and then put a lateral pin through it and pin it all together. This pommel is actually supposed to be useful as a hammer. I have used it a lot as a hammer. It's a little beat up, nicked up, but nothing's come loose. Now, frankly, I admit, this isn't what the knife looked like when it was new. I'll post a picture of them because you can still get this exact same, well, pretty much this exact same knife today. And I swear I did not dye this handle. It was the natural leather brown with the blackening in the grooves, very attractive. But after several years of, again, hard use in my hands on this knife, it is now this kind of espresso, which is sad, but it shows the history and the love. As does the rest of the knife. I've had to re-blue the pommel and the guard a few times. The Parkerization, which was a lot better than the one on the Camelus, has worn down some. Well, let's take a look at that edge. Very good grind on that edge. Not a very severe secondary bevel, but frankly, after all that use and abuse and 40 years of it, I have not had to significantly re-edge this thing. I've had to basically just keep it honed, and that's it. The other thing that's really nice about the K-Bar over the Camelus, the back edge, yeah, the false edge is sharp, but there's no secondary grind at all, and it has stayed that way for 40 years. Now, one thing I did do to it was I bent the quillins on the guard, gave them, instead of straight, it's more of an S-curve, and for me that just makes it more comfortable. It allows me to have my index finger underneath here really comfortably, but also I could put it over the top if I want to choke up on it. I could put my thumb on the back one and get that kind of a grip on it in a couple different ways. So that's just something that makes it more comfortable for me. Doesn't really interfere with sheathing it. Speaking of which, and speaking of love and history, the original sheath, the USMC markings, leather. Yeah, it's a little bit looser and more dinged up, scuffed up, scratched up, cut up, but it's held together for 40 years. Markings on the blade match it. On one side you've got USMC, on the other side you've got the K-Bar name on it. Olean, New York. That's how you pronounce it. But yeah, 40 years of hard use. It's held up phenomenally well. Still love it. Is there anything I don't really love about the knife? Well, this is me being nitpicky. But if you look, especially now that the Parkerization's worn off a little bit, if you look at the line between the edge plane and the side plane, you'll notice it's really not straight. Okay, there's a couple of significant lumps in there. You can't feel them, though. If I run my hand over the edge here, I can't really feel any unevenness. Not so bad on the other side. The other side's not quite straight, but at least it doesn't have the two big bulges that this side has. But this kind of tells me that back then this knife was still kind of hand-finished. Gives it some character. Now, again, I haven't bought the new one yet, so I'll certainly go back and compare and contrast those. But, yeah, this is an impressive, comfortable, useful, tough knife, and has been for 40 years. So that's my endorsement right there. How does it stack up to the Beckers? To be continued in part 2.